Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I have my October wrap up to do today, so I'm going to be talking about the 30-ish books that I read last month. I read a bunch of dark romances for the Love in Vegas signing. It was spooky season, so I read a couple books related to that. I did start holiday romances a little early as well, and I also co-hosted Historical Romance Readathon one weekend in October, so lots of things happening. And I read a lot of books, so let's just get started. The first book that I read back in October was The Reluctant Bride by Monica Murphy. I was really looking forward to this book and this whole series because I love the Midnight Dynasty world. The Reluctant Bride is book one in the series, and it's Perry Constantine's romance. He's forced into this arranged marriage by his mother to a girl named Charlotte. But this book is kind of a slow burn romance. You get to see Perry and Charlotte very reluctant and not happy about this arranged marriage, but they slowly get to know each other a little bit more, start falling for each other. But honestly, it's nothing really unique or different. I didn't think there was anything really that special about this story. It was okay. Perry and Charlotte were fine to read about. They didn't really make an impression or anything. So for our first mafia romance, it was a little underwhelming, and I'm not sure I want to continue with the series just because nothing about it really was that interesting to me. So I give some 3 stars. It was just very middle of the ground. I then went on to a Christmas novella, a holiday novella. I read Merry Inkmas by Talia Hibbert. I gave it some 3 stars as well. If you're in the holiday mood and you really want to read something short and quick, this would be great. Bailey is a heroine who works at this coffee shop, and Cash is the guy who comes in pretty much every day, and it turns out that he does this because he really wants to see Bailey. Unfortunately, she loses her job, but then Cash becomes her new boss because he offers her a job at his tattoo shop. Both of them are super awkward and try to avoid each other all the time, even though they clearly want each other. It's a cute read, very quick, very short, and it does have some good steam. I just didn't fully love it because I wanted a little bit more from it, and also I wasn't a huge fan of Cash and how hot and cold he was with Bailey. I just can't deal with heroes who constantly push the heroines away for some traumatic reason, and it got really tiring to read after a while. But if you can get over that whole part and you want to read something that's short and full of Christmas vibes, this one would still work. Next, I read a mafia romance. I finally read The Anti-Heroes in Love Duet by Giana Darling. I gave book 1, When Heroes Fall, 3.5 stars, and I gave book 2, When Villains Rise, 4 stars. So I did like the series for the most part. I will admit the beginning of the first book was rough for me. It felt like I was missing some things, having not read 2 other Giana Darling books that connect with this one, and I also just hated how everyone treated the heroine in this book, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is a dark mafia romance between Elena and Dante. Elena is a lawyer who has been asked by her sister to defend Dante, who is this mafia capo. It's almost enemies to lovers because these two aren't really big fans of each other. He thinks that she is this ice queen, and she thinks that he's nothing but a thug. But they're forced to be together all the time. There's some good forced proximity because of this case against Dante, and this is when they slowly come to realize that there's more to the other person, and that's how they start falling, and they are hot together. But again, I felt like I was missing something. Book 2 was better though. I liked it more than book 1. Elena and Dante were better here, and I really felt the love and romance between them. It was also a lot more fun with it being set in Italy for a good chunk, but still, I did wish I loved the series more, but it was still a good read, just nothing amazing. I then read a groveling romance novella next because I'm always in the mood for groveling. This is Faithless by Skylar Mason. It's the first book, the first novella in a duet, and it is a cheating romance. And this entire first novella is basically just the setup for all the groveling that will be happening in book 2, or at least I'm hoping will be happening in the sequel. It's a marriage in trouble romance. Mark and Whitney got married 15 years ago, and early on in their marriage, Whitney cheated on Mark with her ex or some crush of hers, and this devastated Mark, of course, and he decided to get revenge against her for the next next 15 years and cheated on her for these next 15 years, even though Whitney only cheated once. So obviously this is a rough relationship, and I'm honestly not even sure that Mark could grovel enough to be forgiven. I really don't know if he can be redeemed because it is 15 years worth of cheating. Not that it makes Whitney, what Whitney did, okay, but she owned up to it, asked for forgiveness, and now she is just tired of her broken marriage. I'm just really curious to see how the sequel will turn out. I'm hoping it's going to be a full-length book because there needs to be a ton of groveling to even get the possibility of redemption. Like, this dude needs to be on his knees begging for forgiveness, 90% of the sequel. So I guess we'll see how this ends up. After this, I caught up on the Never After series by Emily McIntyre. I read books 2 and 3, Scarred and Wretched. Scarred was okay, I give it 3 stars. I wanted to love it more just because it's a Lion King retelling with Scar as the hero. Sarah, the heroine, is a lady who's been betrothed to Prince Michael, who's actually about to become king because his father has just passed. Sarah has a plan of her own though for Michael. She plans to marry the king and then kill him and the rest of his family. Unknowingly to her, the hero, Tristan, who is Michael's brother, his younger brother, also has a similar plan of his own. He's known as the Scarred Prince. He's all dark and dangerous, and he has a scheme of his own, which is to take the throne from his brother because he knows his brother is not going to be a good ruler. So there's a lot of royal politics going on in this romance that I really didn't care for, just wasn't interested in. It was hard for me to get invested in this book, and the romance between Sarah and Michael, I also wasn't feeling it. There wasn't any chemistry between them, so unfortunately I didn't love this book. I didn't enjoy this one as much as I wanted to, but I did love the whole idea of this being a Lion King retelling, but with the villain as the hero, and I definitely would want to read something similar to that. This one just wasn't executed well. Book 3 though, Wretched, was a lot better. I gave this one 4 stars. It's probably my favorite of the series so far. This one's a dark romance with an undercover DEA agent. Nick is the agent who goes undercover to infiltrate this drug dealing business, and Evie is at the center of it all because she's the one who grows the drugs that her father sells. These two actually hooked up, or almost hooked up, the night before they officially met for the first time. So when they see each other again and Nick is introduced as the new guy who wants to get into the business, well, she's shocked to see him again and also a little bit suspicious. But Nick is able to fool Evie even though he's feeling so much angst over it because he knows that he wants her, but he can't have her. And now he has to choose between his job as an agent and Evie, who he's falling for. The book is also really hot. The steam was great because there's like an aspect of forbiddenness to them. Like, Nick is definitely not supposed to be sleeping with someone while he's undercover, and he's definitely not supposed to be sleeping with someone so involved in this investigation. I had a lot of fun with this one though. I gave it 4 stars. The ending was a little iffy though, just because it wrapped up too quickly and neatly for me, but overall I still really liked it, and I did like that it was supposed to be this Wizard of Oz retelling. Next, I read Velvet Cruelty by Eve Dangerfield. I was really excited to read this one because it's reverse harem from Eve Dangerfield, who I have read before and I've really loved a bunch of her books. Velvet Cruelty is the first book in a new trilogy. It's also part of the whole Midnight Dynasty world, and it's a Snow White retelling. January is the young heroine who is very in touch and has been groomed her whole life to become this rich society wife. Basically, when she turns legal, her parents are making her marry this old nasty guy, but on the day of her wedding to that guy, she ends up kidnapped by 4 men who want revenge against her groom. The 4 very dark heroes are Eli, who is actually part of the Morelli family in the Midnight Dynasty world. There's Doc, Bobby, and Adriano. They all have a different quirk to them, and 3 of the 4 guys absolutely hate January and treat her horribly. Bobby is the one who knew her through school and is the one who is halfway in love with her already, but he knows that he can't choose her over their revenge. Overall, it's more like a bully romance, which is probably why I didn't enjoy this one as much. I gave it 3 stars. It gets pretty dark after the kidnapping, And another thing I wasn't a huge fan of was that there wasn't really any romance here just yet. January is just their captive right now, and there's not much romance development for anyone except Bobby, who was already in love with her before the beginning of the book. There's a lot of lust though, but that's about it. I still do think there's potential for the series to get better, so I'm just hoping that the romance will pick up in book 2 because I do want to read it. I read my next holiday romance, which is A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. This one I gave 4 stars too. It's such a fun holiday romance and it was very, very unique. Thankfully, there is some good steam in it. We were not let down on that aspect. The premise of this one is hilarious though. Bee, the heroine, is an adult film star. She's a curvy adult film star and she gets cast into this Hallmark-like holiday movie. So she goes from adult films to this squeaky clean Hope Channel movie. Her co-star is Nolan, who's actually a childhood crush of hers because he used to be in this popular boy band she loved. He needs help with his career and he needs help with money, which is why he takes on this holiday movie. What Bee doesn't realize though is that Nolan instantly recognizes her because he has absolutely watched a bunch of her adult films. He also has a crush on her because of this, so I do like the whole mutual crush thing. There's a lot of good chemistry between them and I just found myself smiling a lot while I was reading this one. It's super cute, very rom-com-y. The whole holiday movie set was hilarious. It also had the perfect holiday vibes. Like I read this before Halloween, it was still spooky season, but it put me in the perfect mood for Christmas. I also read 2 Jackie Lau books last month. My library keeps getting her audiobooks, so I keep listening to them. This first one is Her Big City Neighbor. This is book 1 in the Cider Bar Sisters series, and for some reason I read the series completely out of order. I read books 2 and 3 and finally went back to read book 1. I do really enjoy the series, but this first book wasn't my favorite. I give it 3.5 stars. The heroine Amy inherits this house in Toronto and she falls for her next door neighbor Victor, who is a huge grump. Amy comes from this really small town, so her move to Toronto is something really big and exciting and she gets to explore the city, and along the way she does try to get Victor to go along with her, and for a long time he is really reluctant. He's just a homebody, he's a grump, but you can see her slowly making her way through his walls. It's really cute and sweet, very low drama and low angst. I just struggled a little bit with it because I had a hard time feeling that chemistry in the beginning between Victor and Amy, just because Victor was so reluctant to do anything. But my favorite part is definitely Amy exploring Toronto, going all around the city, and just having fun. So overall it was good, just not one of the best ones in the series. And the other Jackie Lau book that I read was The Unmatchmakers, and I'm torn between 3.5 and 4 stars for this one. Like, it's really cute and silly, but I did want a little bit more from the romance here. This is a family friends to lovers romance, and it's set in the Canadian cottage country, which I didn't even know was a thing, but sounds really nice. The story reminded me a lot of Doll A for Aunties by Jessie Q Sutanto, mostly because of the moms. We get loud, opinionated, ridiculous moms who do everything they can to interfere with their kids' lives, which is exactly what happens in this book. Neil and Leora's moms are best friends. They met each other when they were kids, but it's been a long time since they've seen each other, and when they do reunite, Leora is very shocked to see that Neil is this hottie in glasses. They form this really sweet and slow summer romance that they know can definitely lead to something more after this vacation is over, because both of their families are vacationing for the summer in the Canadian cottage country. But the big hiccup in their romance is actually their moms, because they don't want them to be together, even though they're best friends, and you would think that, you know, they would want their kids to end up together. They don't. They want the complete opposite. They want to unmatchmake them. It's very much a rom-com type of read, which is why it reminded me a lot of Doll A for Aunties. It's got so much silliness, a lot of over-the-top drama, and it worked for the most part. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was very easy to read. It's very quick and lighthearted, so if you're looking for some summer romance to keep yourself warm during this winter, you could try this one. For my next few reads, my next few dark romances, I won't go too much into them just because I do have videos about them where I talk about like all my thoughts, all the nitty-gritty thoughts that I had on these books. So I'll go through them a little bit quickly. The first one is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartmann. This was okay. I liked it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It could have been a 4, but the heroine annoyed me too much. This is a kidnapping romance and it's a unique one. Dean is currently engaged to Cora's sister, so they're very much connected to each other despite not really liking each other. And the night of the engaged couple's bachelor party, Dean and Cora get kidnapped by this crazy serial killer. So it does get dark and Cora does get raped by the serial killer. And the crazy thing is that the serial killer forces Dean to have sex with Cora while they're in captivity. And this is when things start to change for Dean and Cora. And the rest of the book is just them dealing with what they experienced and the aftermath of, you know, them sleeping together. Cora is understandably having a very hard time dealing with what she experienced, but she did take out a lot of her anger on Dean. Yes, she did go through something horribly traumatic, but Dean did too, and it just didn't feel like she was sympathetic to him at all. So yeah, this one, it was really interesting and unique, and I'm glad I read it. It just wasn't as amazing as I thought it was gonna be. And then I read Sicko by Amo Jones. I gave this one 3 stars. This was my first time reading Amo Jones, and her writing is interesting, not my favorite. I did really love the beginning of this one. It's a dark romance. The main characters are adopted siblings. So it's a forbidden romance between Royce and Jade, but then things kind of go downhill when Royce, for some reason, decides to leave Jade and leave his family. And then when he comes back, he is just awful to Jade. So Sicko was all over the place for me. It just could not decide what I wanted to be. Was it an MC romance? Was it some secret revenge story? Was it a taboo romance? I mean, it tried to be all of that and it just did not work. There were so many things that just weren't fleshed out enough for me. Like, there's this huge twist that happens at like 90% of the book, and we barely get to understand any of what happened. It was just okay. It had a very promising beginning, but by the end it was just a mess. I also tried Chantal Tessier for the first time. I read The Ritual and I hated this book. I give it 1 star, which, I mean, if you know me, you know I don't really give 1 stars that often, too sure, but 1 is when I really either hate the book or just thought it was so bad. And this one was definitely both. It's like a weird bully romance with a secret society, and it's set in college. The hero, Riot, is this rich bored dude who joins the secret society so he can kill people, I guess. I still don't really understand the point of that secret society, but he's given a woman a chosen, and his chosen is the heroine, Blakely. So he's given Blakely without her consent, so he just decides that he owns her now. It was very unromantic. I thought the whole idea of the lords was so stupid, and I truly did not see how Blakely ever fell in love with Riot, and I didn't get a single romantic vibe from him. So this one absolutely just did not work for me. For my next author, it was also another author that I tried for the first time. It's Monica James, and I read Bad Saint, which is her dark romance, and then I read Beyond the Roses, which is not dark, but pretty depressing. Bad Saint I gave 3.5 stars to. It's another kidnapping romance that I read last month. The heroine, she gets married, but then on the day of her honeymoon, she gets kidnapped by these men. Willow does everything she can to escape from them, escape from Saint, but it's pretty hopeless for her. She never really gives up though, which I did admire in her, but she did do some pretty dumb things as well trying to escape. Saint is the mystery man, and Willow is trying to understand why he does what he does. They do form this connection mostly because he's the only one who doesn't really try to kill her or rape her, which, you know, the bar is very low, but I did like the chemistry between them, and the suspense was well done. I was very much trying to figure out what was going on and what Saint was doing. This book is the first in the All the Pretty Things series, and I liked it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a good start to this trilogy, and I do eventually plan on finishing the rest of the series. And the other Monica James book is Beyond the Roses, and I don't even know how to describe this one. It's like a medical romance. The hero is a doctor and the heroine is terminally ill, and this book does not end with a happily ever after, but somehow I still enjoyed myself. I give it 4 stars, but I did know going into it that it wouldn't exactly have a happy ending. Lola comes from a very wealthy family and she has been sick pretty much her entire life. She knows that she's not going to live very long, so she decides to spend her last few moments at Strawberry Fields, which is this camp for terminally ill children. She volunteers there because she knows what these kids are going through, and that's where she meets Roman, the doctor at this camp. So I did enjoy reading about these two. I thought they were really sweet with a big side of depressing. I feel like if you're a crier, you might cry for this one, but this is definitely the kind of book that you need to be in the right mindset for before you start reading, and somehow it still worked for me because I give it 4 stars. Moving on from the dark romances, because I definitely needed a break from them after that binge, I then read Scandalized by Ivy Owens. If you didn't know, Ivy Owens is a pen name for Lauren from Christina Lauren. So she secretly read a book on her own, but then when this came out, she did reveal her actual name. I was intrigued by this one. It ended up being okay. It's another like low steam contemporary romance. This time it's from former childhood friends, and he is also her former best friend's brother. Gigi, the heroine, is an investigative journalist who is trying to fly back home to LA but finds herself stranded in Seattle. Her flight gets stuck, and this is when she reunites with her childhood crush and her former best friend's older brother, Alec. They end up reconnecting because of this stuck flight, which I did think was a pretty fun concept. They do spend the night together, and when they finally do make it onto their flight and go back home to LA, this is when Gigi discovers that Alec is, of all things, this famous Korean drama actor. For some reason, she feels super betrayed by this, by him not telling her what he did for a living. So she's angry that he didn't tell her her real job, which I didn't really understand. And then she herself ends up having secrets of her own because her latest case for her job ends up being somehow related to Alec and his family. I normally do enjoy celebrity romances, and I thought it was interesting that we got a K-drama actor in this one, but I just never really fell in love with these characters, and the romance did feel a little boring. Even though Alec is this famous actor, the romance itself just never felt all that exciting. I did think it was interesting though that Lauren from Christina Lauren decided to go out on her own, but honestly the only thing that I really want from Christina or Lauren or Christina Lauren is just their steamy romances back. Next, I read one of my favorite books this year, which is The Words by Ashley Jade. I loved this rockstar romance. It is so angsty, so messy, and so good. It's like 4.5 to 5 stars for me. It definitely could have been like a solid 5 stars if there was a little bit more groveling in it, but still, I love this book. I loved Phoenix and Lennon. It's a second chance romance between them. These two were classmates during high school. They bond and become friends when she's assigned as his tutor because he's dyslexic. Phoenix dreams of making it big and becoming this huge rock star, and Lennon is like his #1 supporter. But then the end of high school comes and Phoenix betrays Lennon. He throws her away, and fast forward 4 years later and he is spiraling after the death of one of his band members. He needs a babysitter stat who won't either sleep with him or enable him, and this is where Lennon comes in. She does hate him, which means she's not going to sleep with him and she's not going to enable him, and she desperately needs the money that his manager offers her to be his babysitter. So Lennon goes on tour with Phoenix and his band, and it is so angsty. There's a ton of push and pull between them. You will hate Phoenix for a very long time, and then you'll slowly somehow fall in love with him. Like, I still don't know how I fell in love with him, but I did. It was fantastic. I love the story. I love these characters, and it's a big book, but it didn't feel that way because of how much I enjoyed it. So this is definitely one of my favorite reads this year. If you love rockstar romances, even if you don't like rockstar romances, definitely give this one a try. Next up, I read A Million Kisses in Your Lifetime by Monica Murphy. This one was very sweet. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a noodle high school romance, which is not my favorite thing to read, but I did find myself enjoying this one a lot. It's your classic good girl, bad boy sort of romance. Ren is the good girl heroine who always does what she's told, and she is basically this repressed innocent virgin. She gets partnered up for a school psychology project with Crew, who is the popular bad-ish boy. And the thing that I really enjoyed about him is that he has always been into Ren. Pretty much from the moment that he first met her, he just never did anything about it. At least not until now, because there's some good forced proximity between them with this project that they're working on. I mean, overall the romance was really cute and sweet. Crew is very patient with Ren and just wants her to feel good about herself and learn about what she wants. It's a very classic high school romance, nothing unique or amazing, but still very enjoyable to read. I then finally got to reading my spooky romances for the Halloween season. I had a longer TBR, but I couldn't make it. The first one that I read was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This one I was so excited to read because it's a ghost romance and I've heard nothing but amazing things for it. I gave it 3.5 to 4 stars. It was good, but I did feel like something was missing for me. The heroine Florence is a ghostwriter, so another play on the whole ghost thing, and she writes for this very popular romance author. Unfortunately, she's dealing with some writer's block and she's struggling to write romance because of how much she doesn't believe in it anymore. She needs an extension on her deadline, but her hot new editor says no. And then to make her life even more complicated, her father unfortunately passes away, so she has to go back home to help with the funeral. The interesting thing about Florence is that she grew up in a funeral home and she sees ghosts. I felt like the whole she sees ghosts thing was very, very understated. It was just kind of slipped into the story. Like, she's dealing with all these crazy things and then, oh yeah, Florence can also see ghosts. So that was interesting to read, and this does mean that when her editor, her hot editor, dies unexpectedly, he gets into this accident, she's able to see his ghost and communicate with him. Ben's ghost shows up at the funeral home, and this is how they start falling for each other. They start talking because she's the only one who can see him. He can't talk with anyone else. Their whole romance is bookish and dorky and sweet, but I really love the whole family aspect of this book, of Florence and her family dealing with the grief of losing her father. We get so much good character development with Florence, which was really heartwarming to read. She discovers, you know, what she really wants to do in life. The ending, I will say though, is a little predictable, especially if you've read the Mediator series by Meg Cabot, which I grew up on, and is probably the reason why I love ghost romances and just paranormal romances in general. But this book does end on a happily ever after, in case anyone was interested or worried. My other spooky read was A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This one isn't romance, which I know, total shocker that I read it, but I really like this one. I give it 4 stars. It's a gothic vampire book and there is romance. It's actually queer and polyamorous, but this is basically a retelling of Dracula, but from Dracula's first wife's point of view. Constanta is a young woman who is about to die, but she ends up being saved by Dracula and turned into a vampire. You get to see her life with Dracula throughout the next centuries as he makes her his bride, and then he ends up getting his own consorts. You get to see Constanta get jealous over these consorts because she is very much in love with Dracula, but then she slowly comes to realize that he's not exactly the good guy that she thought he was. Constanta does end up falling for 2 of Dracula's consorts, though she mostly has a romance with Magdalena. It was just a very different and unique read that I really, really liked, and I also thought it was interesting how the book was narrated. Like, it's told from Constanta's point of view, but she's talking to you, the reader, but you're Dracula, so she's narrating everything as if she's talking to Dracula. But this was a great choice for the spooky season. It had some perfect gothic vibes. I also saved this book to read for October. This is The Company of Fiends by Catherine Moon. This is the standalone sequel to A Lady of Brookscrape Manor, and I am so sad. I did love this one. I gave it 3 stars, which I am still devastated over because of how much I loved A Lady of Brookscrape Manor. It was one of my favorites last year, and it's still one of my favorite monster romances, so I had some high expectations for the sequel, and it did not live up to them. It was just so long and so boring. Like, look how big this book is. This is another monster reverse harem romance. It's about Hazel, who works at the Company of Fiends. It's a theater for monsters with sex worker performers. Hazel joined the theater 8 years ago, but after all these years, she's kind of feeling burnt out over it. But then things start to take a turn when the other human girls who work at the theater start to go missing. Her 5 monster heroes are very interesting. They're different and unique. Some of them I've never even heard about or come across before. But the thing is, I didn't love any of them because it felt like we only got the surface of their characters, which is weird because this book is longer than the first book, and I felt like I got to know the heroes from A Lady of Brookscrape Manor better than the Company of Fiends. So we have a red imp who also works at the theater as a performer. We have an orc, this giant orc, who is also very shy. He becomes a patron of the theater. There's Nereus, who also works at the theater. He's kind of like the bodyguard, but also an organ player. He's a giant with 6 arms and 3 eyes. There's also a demon known as the Gemini, who's able to split himself into 2 beings. And then the last one is this mysterious detective who comes in to investigate the missing girls. So we have these heroes who are very unique but just not fleshed out enough for me, and then we also have this mystery side plot with the missing girls that doesn't really go anywhere because Hazel is not the one who's investigating. So we barely got enough of that plot as well. It was just mostly Hazel sleeping with all of her monsters, which I mean is fun, I guess, but after a while it got really tiring to read. There's just a lot of missed potential here, and I'm so sad I didn't love this one as much as book 1. And then the 4th and final book that I read for the Halloween season was The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. This one I gave 2 stars to because it was such a disappointment. I was looking forward to another spooky read from Erin Sterling after how much I enjoyed The X-Hex, which I read last Halloween, but The Kiss Curse is pretty much the kind of read that you instantly forget as soon as you finish it. It was underwhelming and not the fun, witchy read I was expecting. The heroine here is Gwen, and she and her family, her little coven, live in this small town that's full of witches, full of paranormal beings, and she runs this witchcraft shop in Graves Glen. Unfortunately for her, there's a competitor who moves in across the street and opens up his own shop. It's Wells, who is one of the brothers from book 1. He decides to move to Graves Glen because this is the town that his witchy paranormal ancestors founded. So Gwen and Wells have this sort of rivals to lovers romance, and it sounds good in theory, like they're competitor shops, but there was 0 chemistry between them. They were so boring to read, and I didn't really grow to care about them at all. I was mostly there for the small town vibes, for the witchy magical vibes, which did still deliver, but it wasn't enough to make up for the lack of romance, so this one was not that great. So after the spooky reads, I read A Cosmic Kind of Love by Samantha Young, mostly because I was doing this interview with her on Instagram, and I had a lot of fun with this one. I gave it 4 stars. It was a very adorable read, and I did love that we got an astronaut hero who works for NASA in this book. And the whole premise of this one, the whole meet cute, was very unique because Hallie and Chris first meet through videos. Hallie is an event planner, and her newest project is a wedding, and the bride is Chris's ex-girlfriend. Because of this wedding, Hallie accidentally comes across these videos that are from Chris to his ex while he's out in space. She watches them, she gets very intrigued by him, but she does know that it's an invasion of his privacy, so she sends him an apology email and an apology video. So this is how these two first meet, through these recorded videos that they don't really communicate besides this, at least not until Chris finally goes back to Earth, and goes to his ex's wedding because he was invited. So Hallie and Chris do grow close throughout the whole wedding planning, and Chris is also dealing with life back on Earth. It's a pretty lighthearted read, not a ton of drama, though there is some intensity with Chris's abusive father. But besides that, it's a very sweet, feel-good, wholesome read, and Chris and Hallie were just very cute together. I ended up reading another new favorite of this year, which is King of Wrath by Anna Huang. I love this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. It was pretty much exactly what I wanted in an arranged marriage romance. It's the first book, the first standalone in the Kings of Sin series, and each book is about a different deadly sin. So this one is Wrath, obviously. It's an arranged marriage, arranged engagement romance, and it's also enemies to lovers. Dante and Vivian hate each other, though they've been forced into this engagement that neither of them wants. He's being blackmailed by her father, and she agrees out of duty to her parents. There's some good forced proximity between these two because she has to move into his house, and they also have to go out to events all the time and show up together. They have to pretend to be together, to be in love and engaged, and, you know, show affection to each other that neither of them feel. There's so much good chemistry here. The sparks were flying. Like, these two hate each other, but they have to pretend to be in love. The engagement is kind of long. It's about a year, and this whole time Dante is trying to get rid of the blackmail that her father has, and Vivian has no idea that all of this is happening. She has no idea that he's being blackmailed, what her father's doing, and she believes that this arranged engagement is real and that they're genuinely falling for each other, and Dante is not holding any secrets. There's some good groveling towards the end because of this. Dante was fantastic. He is jealous and possessive, very much another alpha hero from Anna Huang. I had so much fun with this one. It hit the spot for me. It was exactly what I was craving, what I was in the mood for, so I loved it. I read a small town romance next. I read Beneath the Stands by Emily McIntyre. This one I gave 3 stars too. It was okay, another okay read in this small town series, the Sugar Lake series. It's a new adult romance set in college. Becca is in her senior year and she gets cut off from her parents because she tells them that she's not going to move home after graduation. She finds a job as one of the managers for the men's basketball team, and she literally runs into Eli, the hero, who is her best friend's brother, and he's also the new assistant coach for the team. She hates him though because of how he abandoned her best friend when she needed him. So their reunion isn't exactly the best. They get on each other's nerves a lot, they argue all the time, and then they fall into bed together really easily. They started up their fling so fast it caused me some whiplash, and then just like in book 1 we get this time jump from college, but this time I was really annoyed by it because I was at least somewhat enjoying the new adult vibes of this book. But it's supposed to be a second chance romance. Becca broke things off with Eli because she was scared, and now years later he's getting married, and not gonna lie, I kind of hated him for that, for him moving on so easily, and I just didn't really have a fun time with this second part. And I personally don't like heroes who are so in denial about their feelings for the heroine that they try to move on and they hurt both the heroine and that woman that he tried to move on with. Eli just got on my nerves in the second half, and it was the kind of messy romance that I wasn't a fan of. And then my next 2 reads were historical romances that I read for Historical Romance Readathon. Our group read was Yours Until Dawn by Teresa Medeiros, which I loved so much. I adored this book. I gave this one 5 stars. It's another favorite of mine this year. I had quite a few favorites back in October, which was great. This book is sort of a Beauty and the Beast historical romance. We have Gabriel, who is our blind hero. He went off to war to prove something to this woman that he was falling for. He goes back home blind and becomes this beast who never wants to leave his house and makes things difficult for all of his employees. Samantha is hired as his new nurse, and she definitely does not give in to Gabriel's beastliness, and she does everything she can to make his life better, to make his life more accessible to his blindness. The romance is so freaking sweet, and you can clearly see how Gabriel falls head over heels in love with her and is just so grateful and thankful to her for being in his life. There's a little twist at the end that I thought was great, but I just loved how much Gabriel adored Samantha. He turns from this reclusive, beastly grump to someone who's just gone for her. The Beauty and the Beast vibes were great too. This was my first time reading Teresa Medeiros and I freaking loved it. I already can't wait to read more of her historical romances. The other historical romance that I read for the readathon was Until You by Judith McNaught. I love Judith McNaught and I've been meaning to finally read this third Westmoreland book for the longest time because Kingdom of Dreams was great and I love Whitney My Love so much. So I finally got to Stephen's book. This is an amnesia romance and I give it some 4 stars. It's not quite as good as the first 2 books, but I still did enjoy it, though the beginning was rough. The premise is a little bit complicated. There's quite a few moving parts to it. There's an American heiress, Charisse, who is supposed to get married to Lord Burleton, who I believe is a baron, but she breaks off this engagement without telling the lord and gets married to someone else on her way to England. The heroine is Sheridan, who is Charisse's companion, and she goes on the ship to England without her charge because Charisse has disappeared. So she's panicking because she lost Charisse and she believes that she'll be thrown into jail once she lands in England. Our hero is Stephen, who is an earl, and he is Clayton's brother from Whitney My Love. He accidentally runs over and kills Lord Burleton, who was engaged to Charisse. So he is waiting at the docks, waiting for that ship to land and tell Charisse that her fiance is dead and he's gonna try to pay for anything that she needs. Of course, we know that it's not Charisse that shows up, but Sheridan. But before she can tell him the truth about who she is, she gets hit in the head and loses all her memory. So Stephen believes that Sheridan is the American heiress. Sheridan believes that she's the American heiress because she has no memory of who she is. And Stephen pretends to be the lord that Charisse was supposed to marry, who ended up dying. So I don't know if you were able to follow all of that, but it was a lot. The beginning was wild and I felt so bad for Sheridan because she was being lied to by everyone, by Stephen, all while she was being so vulnerable and having no memories. Stephen took me a little while to warm up to, and not just because of all the lies. I had a hard time feeling that romance, that love that he was developing for Sheridan. He's just so against relationships, against love. He is that classic eternal bachelor who, you know, has constant mistresses. But the romance, oh, I did end up loving Stephen and how angsty and tortured he was feeling over Sheridan. Both of them mess up towards the end and they both have to do some groveling, which I did appreciate reading. It was just a lot for a romance, for a historical romance, but I mean, it is Judith McNaught and I do love the way she writes, even though they can get pretty crazy. So this one, I mean, it's not the best in the series, but still a good read. And then one of my most anticipated reads, one of my most anticipated sequels of the year finally came out, so I had to read it. It's It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. I won't go too much into this in this wrap up just because I do have a video review of it. It's like 10 minutes long, so I'll condense it into something short here. I give it some 3 stars. I was very disappointed. I did not love it. I definitely did not enjoy it as much as the first book. It was very okay. It almost felt unnecessary, though I did appreciate finally getting Alice and Lily's happily ever after, but it was just very underwhelming for me. We do get both Alice and Lily's point of views, but it was very slow going. There wasn't much of a plot. The romance felt a little bit boring at times, and it just felt like a very long and dragged out epilogue for It Ends With Us. So was the sequel necessary? Not really. Do you need to read it if you love It Ends With Us? Not really. I mean, if you have time and nothing else to read, go for it. It's just not gonna blow you away. For my next book, I read Bad Girl Reputation by Elle Kennedy. This is book 2 in her Avalon Bay series. This is the standalone sequel to Good Girl Complex, which was a mess, but surprisingly the sequel was not that bad. I'm torn between 3.5 to 4 stars for this book. This one I thought was better because the characters were more interesting. It's a second chance romance between Evan and Genevieve. They had a very toxic relationship growing up. They were that constant on and off again couple. That is until Genevieve finally had enough of everything, of her relationship, of her small town, of her family, and decided to move away without telling anyone. But now she's back years later for her mother's funeral, and of course she runs into her ex, and there's still clearly something between them even after years apart. But Genevieve doesn't want to go back into that sort of toxic relationship. She doesn't want to be part of this life that was just constant parties and constant drinking. I just really like Jen's character and how she changed herself. She transformed herself for the better because she knew that if she continued down the path that she was on, she was gonna end up like her mother. She's grown up and grown into herself, and because of that, Evan sees that he also has some growing up to do. He was really angry at Jen for leaving him without saying anything, but now that she's back, he realizes that she is still the only one for him. So now he has to prove that he's worth a second chance, so that part was great to read. I just really like that there was a lot more depth to these characters, at least compared to the characters from book 1. So I like this one. I think I was just really glad that it wasn't as disappointing as book 1 was. So it's a very generous 4 stars. And then my final 2 books in this wrap up were shorter reads. This second to last one is a Harlequin Presents book. I was really craving some angst that only Harlequin Presents could deliver, and of course I was craving some good groveling, so I read After the Billionaire's Wedding Vows by Lucy Monroe. This was great. It was pretty much what I was wanting to read. I gave it 4 stars, and I mean, I love Lucy Monroe in general. I read a bunch of her Harlequin Presents before, and they were really good. Very angsty with some good grovel. And this is actually one of her newer releases from last year. I think she took a break from writing Harlequins for a while, but she's back. I also don't really tend to read the newer Harlequins. I usually read the old school ones, but this was great. It's a marriage and trouble romance with a Greek tycoon hero who works too much and has neglected his wife and family. Andros gets a wake-up call though when Polly tells him to his face that his brother is a better husband to his wife than Andros is to Polly. He gets very confused and shocked. He's like, wait, what? How can this be? I'm an amazing husband even though I work 80-hour weeks. I rarely come home for dinner or lunch, and I rarely ever spend time with my wife except for sex. So he's an idiot, but he does wake up really fast and he realizes that he needs to do better, otherwise he's gonna completely lose his wife. And he does prove to Polly that she and their children are his #1 priorities now. It takes her a while to believe in it, to trust him, but I love seeing him grovel, so this was a fun read. It hit the spot for me and it was exactly what I was in the mood for, which was something quick and angsty and grovelly. And then my final read of October was a Jessa Kane novella. She released a new one last month, so obviously I had to read it. This is As If I Wouldn't Fall, which I gave 4 stars to. It was one of her better reads. It's another high school romance. Both the main characters are seniors, and of course the hero has been in love and obsessed with her since freshman year, and now Flint gets his chance with Ayla when she accidentally wrecks her car and she brings her car into the shop that he works at. She doesn't have money to get the car fixed, so she offers up herself in exchange for his services, and he's just totally done for now because he finally has the one thing that he's been obsessing over and wanting for years. It's very intense. I mean, it is Jessa Kane. Even though these are younger characters, they're still the same Jessa Kane intensity to them. And also, if you need another reason to read this novella, the hero has the heroine's name tattooed on his dick. On that note, I will end this wrap up. That was the last book that I read last month, and it was quite the read to end October with, but it was a good reading month for me. Besides, you know, the 1 star that I had, there were some duds, but also some new favorites, and I will take them when I can. But that is it for this wrap up. Let me know your thoughts if you read any of these books. Links to all of them will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!